Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Friday, and on Friday, and then the weekends, and then maybe Monday, BookTubers in this neck of the woods tend to give a reading report, a progress report, an update of Friday reads, whatever you want to call it, where we stop for a bit and say, all right, how are things going? How are things going in the reading front? What have I finished? What have I liked? What have I thought about it? What am I working on now? What am I planning to read next? I watch a ton of BookTube. If you have a deep subject that you want to unburden yourself with, I will listen gladly. I like your video and maybe leave a comment. Uh, if you have a book review that you want to do, you want to react about a book and talk about it a bit, I'm right there. You want to make a list, you want to join in an event, I'm right there. All those videos, we make them and we send them out into the void. Most people do, but it's these sit downs with regular reading reports that really feel like conversations to me with other channels that don't always feel that way. I like to think that every video on this channel feels like a conversation. Certainly, I view them that way. But for other channels, these are the ones that have the most chatting over the back fence feel to them. And I want to join in. I want to join in just a little. I want to talk about a handful of the books that I've been dealing with, or that I've read, or that I plan to read right at this moment when I'm making this video. I do a lot more reading than most people do. I do nothing else aside from care for my tiny little dog who is sound asleep. So doing a comprehensive Friday reads would probably take too long. But I want to go over a few things, like, for instance, there are some rereads. I reread this, Ronald Clark's biography of Benjamin Franklin, which I remember when this thing was brand new. I remember when it pained me a little because I was more or less out of the reviewing game when this came out for the first time, and I very much wanted to review it. I've had of course, I was out of the reviewing game for a long, long time. A lot of Franklin books went out of the water, but I have had the opportunity in the intervening years since I came back to the reviewing world to review some Franklin biographies, and that's been really good. But the more I think about it, I've read a huge number of Benjamin Franklin biographies, and a huge number of different fractions of his life. Some about his Boston years, some about his European years, some about his time as a founding father, some about his time as an inventor, even as a father. But I honestly do think, I know that there's a bit of recency bias here, but I honestly do think that Ronald Clark's biography of him is the best one-volume biography there is. I love its stately eloquence. I love it. Everything about it I love. And I wasn't really thinking that. I haven't reread it in probably 25 years. And in the meantime, I've reread and read a lot of other Franklin books. And this one just, it really stands out. So it was a whim that I reread it, but I'm glad that I did. And then there's another one that I am slowly rereading. It is in the bathroom, so I don't read it all at once. Although I do read a little bit every day. And if that strikes you as unlikely, just wait until you're old. That's this, The Other Bolin Girl by Philippa Gregory, which I found a cheap paperback of it. With this classic cover design. I do not want the movie cover with what's his name glowering on the cover as a totally miscast Henry VIII. I don't want the movie cover. I want this thing, which in the paperback and also in the hardcover has little highlights of plucked out gold. I've determined from reading the trade paperback in the bathroom that what I really, really want, next time I see it, I'm going to snap it up, is a hardcover of this book. If you were at your library book sale and you see a hardcover of this book, grab it for me. I very much want a hardcover of this book, because I now know that this is not going to be the last time I reread it. Of course, like everybody else, I was completely swept away by this thing when it was a publishing phenomenon when it came out. It's the story of Anne Boleyn's sister, who was the king's mistress before Anne Boleyn was. Now, Tudor experts will tell you that that's the extent of it. That's the extent of it. And I don't believe it. I've read as much as those Tudor experts, and I don't believe it. I do not discount the Tudor court gossip that said that before Anne Boleyn and before Mary Boleyn, King Henry topped their mother, that she was his mistress before either one of them. I don't discount that. The timing, the locations, the access, the motive all line up. And there were rumors at the time, at just around the right time. But anyway, this is the story of Anne Boleyn's completely non-ambitious, lovely sister who wants nothing at all of the world or the kingdom or the crown that Anne does. Mary Boleyn is a faithful lady in waiting to Queen Catherine. She is genuinely in love with Henry. When they first start having their affair together, she's genuinely besotted with him. And more important than that, she wants a different life, which really, I was not, this time around rereading the book, I'm really noticing that aspect of it. She wants, it's not just that she's not ambitious, she wants a completely different life than the one that Anne wants, or the one that anyone else in her family wants. She is, keep in mind, while she's Henry's mistress, she is a married woman. She's Mrs. Carey. And in a way is affectionate to her husband. One of the neat things in this book that I totally forgot, I forget it every time I reread it, is the second act that their marriage gets. Where they're no sooner married than Henry swoops in and wants her for a mistress. And so the husband is along, he's benefiting, he's getting lands and manors, he's getting promoted, he's getting a doubling in pay. But he isn't allowed any congress with his wife. We don't want any if she falls pregnant, we don't want any suspicion that it wasn't Henry. So he isn't allowed, he has to just watch himself being cuckolded the whole time. And they barely know each other when that happens. And the novel gives them a second chance to get to know each other. And it's wonderfully sweet, wonderfully sweetly done. But the thing that I notice most, the thing that usually when I've read this book, the thing that I notice is the extravagantly portrayed vicious reptilian cruelty of Anne Boleyn in this book, which is by the second half, the whole second half of the book, it's so prominent that you can't have any other impression. But this time around, I'm noticing all the lovely little details that Philippa Gregory works in to underscore the different world that Mary Boleyn wants. And that world is pretty much summed up in Hever Castle. This lovely little place. I had forgotten the extent to which Philippa Gregory showers that little place with gorgeous descriptive prose to make you, the reader, fall in love with it as well. All that Mary wants to do is retire to the country. Few snug little rooms, gorgeous countryside all around, farmers and herders and whatnot that she can ride around and see and talk to. That's all she wants, is a simple life. She doesn't want to be at court. Now, you can believe that or not of someone who was trained in the French court. I don't. But it makes for a wonderful contrast in the book. So I'm enjoying it. My one heartbreak is that this is not going to survive more than one read. I need a hardcover of this book. But then, okay, this next one was suggested by Kindle Unlimited. And I will take pretty much anything that Kindle Unlimited suggests to me, or those email deals that you get. It's trains on it's tanks on lorries, because the next province over is acting up. So if you hear unbelievable amounts of background noise, that's what it is. It's troops and tanks on lorries going towards that district in order to shell it into oblivion. But anyway, what was I saying? Couldn't hear me over the lorry that was 100 feet long, traveling at 60 miles an hour with armored cars on it. I sign up for those email deals as well, where you get the day's deals of free ebooks. The number one rule that I follow, which everybody ought to follow, is don't ever buy anything. Don't ever buy anything. Sign up for all of those, as many of those things as you want, but don't pay anything for an ebook. Not $1, not $2, nothing. Take all the free ones that you want, but don't buy anything. And so that's what I do, and I usually end up, I do a fair amount of reading on them. I try to keep up with them. I do a fair amount of reading on the iPad and also on the Kindle, where they are delivered automatically from that program. I read this. This is by Jan Hurst Nicholson, and it is Mystery at Ocean Drive, it's a middle grade story about a young surfer who is making his way back home when he is sideswiped and nearly flattened by a big fancy car, and people rush out of the car. A young girl, his own age, rushes out of the car to see if he's all right, but she's bundled back into the car and driven away, and as he watches her drive away, She is saying, help me, to him. And he can't get it out of his mind, so he goes back and is told no one by that name, no one by that description lives at this house. It's a mystery. In other words, he has to get to the bottom of what's going on. And to tell you the truth, I wasn't aware this was a middle grade story until I was like halfway through the book, when I was realizing, oh wait, the stakes aren't going to get any higher. You and your friends are going to figure out what's going on here and work your way to a happy ending. Which is what you want. And that's what you'll get in a middle grade book. For some reason I was expecting this to have, I don't know, explicit content, dislodged eyeballs, over-the-top violence, whatever. Maybe I'm just too infected by the 21st century. It ends up being a very charming middle grade story, with easy potential for more. So I didn't mind it at all. It's very nice that I get those emails, I get Kindle Unlimited updates, so that I can just feast on all of this indie and self-published stuff that I wouldn't know exist otherwise. Okay, then we have one of you very kindly sent me some old Regency romances. Old Signet Regency romances are a real sweet tooth of mine. I absolutely love them. They're not made and they're not done anymore. Everything is now more explicit. It's less historical. It's more slangy and contemporary. And I don't object to that either. There are two Regencies on this list. One is old and one is new. I like them both. But this is an old one. This is by Charlotte Louise Dolan, and this is the Three Lords for Lady Anne, who is a governess. She has very headstrong charges and is slowly drawing as the book opens, she is slowly drawing the amorous attention of her employer, who is a nobleman. There's another nobleman in the story who also has amorous attentions, doesn't really care if she says yes or not. One of the things that, and she's a complete ingenue, she has no idea that it's even wrong. But one of the things that one of the allowances you have to make with older romances of any kind, including older Signet Regency romances, is all the stuff that Sarah at the Bookish Knitter and I have talked about this when we've had conversations together, conversations together about romances, that you have to sift through these older romances for the stuff that they do well and that you will like. This is full of wonderful dialogue. It's wonderfully paced. But you have to sift through these because there will be things that strike you as a 21st century reader as wrong. Issues of consent, issues of maturity, issues of power differential. There is actually no way that any of eventually Lady Anne has three suitors in this book, and there is no actual way that any one of the three of them could ethically pay her any court at all. The 21st century would be aware of that, as we're going to see in the other Regency book that I'm talking about. The 21st century is aware of those things. That isn't PC. That isn't people being, aren't you being Twitter politics correct? That's good. That's moral enlightenment. It's good that we don't just brush right over that anymore. Those sorts of things are good. It's good to be aware of them. And they are in this book, so I noticed them. This is still incredibly delightful. Just incredibly delightful. Charlotte Louise Dolan has a couple of weaknesses as a writer. She absolutely cannot write children, but then not many writers can. But the last third of this book, pure delight. Just pure delight. Exactly what I come to these things for. Then this next one is by Annette Canel. I don't know exactly when this comes out. I read a slightly uncooperative PDF. It was done as well as it could be, but I really need to take that PDF to one of those free websites that will convert it into EPUB. I always hesitate to do that because when you're converting out of PDF, it will often break the formatting. PDF is like an island unto itself. I guess I can just read it the way it is and just wait for the finished copy. But this is called The Green Ages. And it's about medieval sustainability. And automatically when I read that, I thought, okay, so instead of saying that your grandparents were horrible people, this book is going to say that your great, 10 times great grandparents were horrible people. Or this author is going to impart anachronisms into medieval times. Anachronisms about the way that we think about the environment and sustainability today into medieval times. And I was wrong. This author knows her subject really, really well and plunks down on a few examples. You get the strong impression that there are many other examples out there plunks down on a few examples where ordinary people or professional farmers, keep in mind, somebody who farmed for a living successfully 1,000 years ago, had to really know what they were doing, no less than they do today. It might not be what we would consider to be science, but it was not open for question, and it could fail if you didn't know what you were doing. And she plunks down on a few examples of sustainable agriculture. What are we going to do to make sure that this system works not just for us but for our grandchildren? Or a sustainable economic environment. In another situation, she describes an entire community that has decided on a more sustainable version of their barter economy than exists in 50 miles in any direction from where they are, and it works. And so on and so forth. One case after another. There's one case example in this book that I thought was weaker than the others, but I was convinced. Totally convinced. Especially since her point is larger. As you might expect. Her point is larger than just pointing out that these things happened in the past. Her point is to say, they can work. These sorts of things can work. And by implication, the barons and the lords who were on hilltops and who had the power of life and death over people, who had to sometimes furtively try these experiments without them knowing too much, or very intentionally keep up this flow of profits, even though we're getting the profits in a slightly different, more sustainable way. The book makes some pretty lightly veiled implications about how we have those same overlords today. They are the plutocrats that run the world today, the 51 men who run the world today, and the clear idea here is that the minute people start to think about arranging systems that will be more holistic, gentler on the environment, and more long-term, the more people start to think about that, the more they are working against the interests of whoever the lord or seigneur is on the high hilltop, whether that hilltop is in Cupertino or not. It got me thinking. It got me thinking all of these things. What a book. Loved it. I think it's coming out later this year, and I'm pretty sure, since it's a PDF, an unwieldy PDF, that it must be from an academic press. But you might want to put it on a list. It is good. This is Stanley Edgar Hyman. I got this just yesterday, but I could not resist. This is his book, Standards. It's an endless amount, dozens of ordinary newspaper book reviews. You've got 600 words. I'll give you $50. Here's a new book. I'm chucking it at you across the room. Read it. Write me up something on it. Make it good. Make the prose good. You don't have to like the book. I don't care about the book, but make the prose good. And it was a delight, an absolute delight. I absolutely loved it. Most of the stuff in here, well, almost everything in here, I disagree with Hyman about his critical judgments on it. But a lot of the stuff that's in here is gone anyway from the collective conversation. This is exactly what I love. I have a whole section in my library devoted to books like this, so it was a joy. Then this next one is by an author I really like, Jonathan Mayberry. This is The Dragon in Winter, which is a novel starring his main character Kagan, but by this point it stars a lot of other people too. This is the third book in a series, and the publisher very kindly sent me the first two books, which I worked my way through in the spring and summer, to get to this third one, which feels like a concluding volume. I don't know if it is. The cover design and also a couple of the hints dropped in the last part of this book kind of hint that it's not, that this story will just keep going on like the Wheel of Time. But this felt like a conclusion, but it did not feel like a beginning. So definitely you should not, don't bother trying to read this if you haven't read the first two books. The first one is called Kagan the Damned, so you can start there. Given that, I thought this series was slow to reach a boiling point. Did not reach a boiling point in the first book. Barely did in the second book. This thing, though, this was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. By now, I was invested in all the characters, a few in particular. Oddly, none of them the main character. I was never invested in the main character. If he died in the first chapter of this book, I wouldn't have batted an eyelash. But I love this author because talk about pacing. He is a master of writing a page-turning book. His Joe Ledger books are He-Man action adventure with an indestructible main character, the kind of Reacher or novel series like that, and they are so good. They are so incredibly addictive. They are amazing. And the same sentiment is present here. It didn't really get as much of a chance to exercise itself in book 1 and book 2 as it does here, but here it's just breakneck, almost from the beginning. So I loved it. It's just a cautious recommend, that's all, because I can't recommend the book on its own. Then we have Kate Bateman. We saw this on this channel. This is How to Fall for a Scoundrel. This is the other Regency romance, or roughly thereabouts, that I read, that I'm talking about here for this Friday Reads. I read a lot of other stuff for Garb August, for Summer Sport, but a handful of books will do. This is a modern Regency romance. It's every bit as lovely to look at. It's a photograph instead of a painting. But it's every bit as lovely to look at as the old Signet Regency romance. It's more explicit. The characters talk more explicitly. The language is far more contemporary. The older Signet Regencies are full of of Regency dialogue, Regency slang, Regency concerns. These tend not to be. These tend to be fantasies set in ye olden times. They're not quite as alternate reality fantasy as, for instance, the TV show Bridgerton, but they're not far off. And I'm not faulting that at all. I love those old Regencies where you're really getting a taste for that the characters are living in a period of time, as opposed to just a ye olden time of lords and ladies. Another neat thing about this book is that it's not about lords and ladies. The two characters are not landed gentry, which is rare even for modern day Regencies. The main character is the foremost sleuth in a private investigation firm. Of course, she can't run it herself. She's a woman in a time when that was totally forbidden. So she has made up a boss, a guy who actually owns the thing. But then a man shows up, a charming man shows up, claiming to be that guy. Now, she knows perfectly well that he's not. that is an imaginary person. She's trying to figure out his game. He's trying to figure out hers. And they're both trying to figure out a third game, the actual plot of the book. And it's done wonderfully. Just wonderfully. I remember now the first book in this series that I read. It's done wonderfully. It's a classic idea in romance novels that the two characters are wary of each other, but they need each other, and they're eventually growing to love each other. And that happens here in a just delightful way, and without any of the moral put your hand over your eye stuff that happens in older Regencies, where a young girl can be walking across a meadow and a man turns the corner and decides, "Oh, I want to chase you." Now, he's not chasing you to find out which of you is faster. He's chasing you to throw you on the ground and have his way with you. And in an old Regency romance, she will run. She'll be a bit faster. Maybe she'll be clever. She'll duck into a stream or hide behind a gazebo. He'll be frustrated and wander off. And she ends up marrying that man in some of those earlier novels. No, there's nothing harmless about what he intended in the first part. And you can't treat it as harmless. We don't do that anymore. Thankfully, we don't just pass right over that anymore as men being men. And you don't have to worry about that sort of thing in modern Regency romance. So that was gone completely. That's how they conflict. Then this next one is something we've seen on this channel. This is Nick Lloyd, The Eastern Front. This is he's now done the Western Front and the Eastern Front, two big universal overview of the First World War. This I thought was weaker than the first volume, but still really, really good. Getting these two, I don't know if they're ever offered as a box set or companion pieces to each other. Getting the two of them, giving them to a history buff fan, especially a World War I fan that does not read new releases. It'd be a good call. They're very entertaining. This was very, very entertaining, filled with personalities, just filled with the human element. Maybe not in such a pandering way as, for instance, Max Hastings does it, where we're constantly checking in with a dog-faced private, but still very appealingly done. Okay, all right. This next one is not appealing. This is a Trump book by a Trump minion. This is At War with Ourselves by H.R. McMaster. was a National Defense Secretary under Donald Trump, and is writing a Trump book on the subject. He was there. He heard that how utterly megalomaniacal and also insane and stupid Donald Trump is. None of those words appear in this book. He knows that Donald Trump is a traitor to the country, that Donald Trump has sold U.S. military secrets to outside bidders, including nations that are hostile to this country. None of that is in this book. Hints of it, but none of that. He mainly settles on very toothless, salacious gossip about what a jerk Trump is, when he was in a position to know and did know and does know far worse things that he will not include in this book. Why? I have no idea. Might like to get hired by the boss again. Doesn't want to find red-hatted Trump cult members at his driveway when he gets home at night. Doesn't want to find them in his home with a claw hammer and his wife held hostage. I don't know. I don't know what his reason is. All I know is he's a coward and a traitor himself. By writing a book like this, as if, I was a stern guy, I had my stand-up principles, and I did my best. I did my best. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. You haven't denounced Trump, aside from kitchen gossip. You haven't endorsed Joe Biden. You haven't endorsed Kamala Harris. You haven't gone and called a press conference. You could do that tomorrow and say a lot more than what you say in this book, and you won't do it. So I read this in a white-hot rage the whole time. None of these books are... I read them, but, oh, God, they do a number on me. They do a number on me. How dare you hold out your chest? How dare you call yourself a man of honor? Anyway, we can finish up. We'll finish up on a happy note. This is... I don't know how to say this author's name. Is it Thao? This is Dustin, Thao. And this is When Haru Was Here. And this author might be familiar to some of you. This is YA fiction. He might be familiar to some of you because he wrote a YA novel a while ago, last year or the year before that, called You've Reached Sam. That was genuinely touching. I thought at the time that I read it that it was a slight bit on the hokey side, but the more I've thought of it, it stuck with me. And the more I've thought about it, the more I've thought, oh, that was just genuinely touching. And this is even more so. Oh my God, this is even more so. A young man, a boy, I guess, has incredibly strong feelings for a boy named Haru, who then dies. And the young boy goes on with his life and tries to make the best of it and tries to pay attention to other people. And one of the people who walks through the door that he's trying to pay attention to is Haru. Alive and well, able to talk to him. No one else can see him. And so what on earth is going on here? What is going on here is the question that operates for the first half of this book. And wonderfully, utterly wonderfully, the second half of this book is you saying, well, does it really matter? Does it really matter what's going on here? Surely the why of what's happening is more important than the what at this point. I thought it was remarkable. I really, really enjoyed it. I don't usually read YA that I enjoy. Most of it is toxically corrupted by Twitter. Toxically so. Irretrievably so. And maybe on some level that I'm not noticing, this is. Maybe this book is actually scolding me and all other cishet white old men on some level. But I didn't detect it. I didn't detect that at all. And I'm not going to go hunting for it. Okay? I'm not quite so... obsessive as the neck-bearded fascists on YouTube. I'm not going to go hunting for stuff to offend me. I'm pretty good at reading a book, and I didn't detect that here. So I was able to just enjoy it. What a sweet, lovely story. So there you go. We'll end on a happy note for a little partial Steve reads, little partial Friday reads for today. And of course, with all Friday reads, I want to know about you, especially if you don't have a BookTube channel. First of all, why don't you have a BookTube channel? You should. It's a lot of fun. But if you don't, I also want to know. BookTubers, by and large, will get around to it. They'll do a Friday Reads, a check-in of some kind. But if you don't, feel free to tell me what you're reading, whether or not you're enjoying it, what's coming up, how pretty I am. Feel free to tell me about all of that. And keep in mind, if you're going to tell it to me in an email rather than in a comment on this video, feel free to grease the wheels with a little bit of Steve bribery. Not in the form of money, but in the form of pictures of your babies. Not actual babies. Human babies are gross. But your dogs, your cats, your other vermin, I would love to see it. But I'd love to know. I'd love to know what your own Friday Reads is. But that's mine. I'm adding to the collection of reading check-in videos. I'll do it again next week if I can remember. And until then, I'll wrap this up, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.